Hello, this is Joseph Hajj from Swish. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at Swish, responsible for strategic partnerships and internationalization. Thanks to the MoneyLIVE team for inviting me to talk a little bit about Swish, and to all people listening in, thanks for listening. I have a very short presentation on Swish, and the purpose of this is basically just to on the topic of the future of mobile payments, looking to Sweden, where Swish has emerged as the preferred payment option here in Sweden, and where we have in our core basically changed the way people pay and act. So I was hoping to tell you a little bit more about that. I'll spend 15 to 20 minutes talking about Swish, and then leave 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So I'll start by just introducing Swish as a concept and as a company, and then I'll move on to talk a little bit about the product range that we offer to the market. And then last but not least, tell you a little bit about where we are going with Swish into the future. So just to start with, what is Swish? So Swish is an account-to-account real-time payment service built into an app that is where all Swedish banks basically participate. We'll get a little bit more into that later. We've built this on a unique infrastructure here in Sweden, where the domestic clearinghouse basically has set up a local infrastructure for real-time payments, while the Swedish banks at the same hand have set up a national identification scheme that is broadly used by most Swedes. We are today one of the largest account-based payment services in Europe, and last year we did 524 million transactions, and trending towards a 30% plus growth this year. We are fully free of charge for the consumer, and the whole business revolves around two things. One is the reduction of cash and reducing the costs associated with cash, while also offering an alternative payment method that is based on account. We are bank-owned and bank-led, so we are owned by the 6 largest banks in Sweden, and then have an additional 6 banks participating into the scheme. And one of the unique sort of setups that we have is that, as opposed to other similar services, we have one app for all and one brand for all, meaning that all these 12 banks are issuers and acquirers of the service, but it's still one service, and the user only has one app to interact with, whereas the merchant only has one brand to accept in his checkout. Today we do P2P and C2B, and we are in pilot with B2C, so payouts basically, or disbursements, which already in the pilot phase is 4% of all our transactions. Today we do P2P, C2B, and within the C2B scope we do both e-commerce and physical stores. We launched the e-commerce service in 2017 and already have an 8% market share there. So the role of Swish is basically being the hub between a number of infrastructures. So Swish is basically the scheme. We are the brand. We are the technology that connects to other players in this ecosystem. So one is the bank ID, the identification and authentication scheme here in Sweden, also bank-owned and bank-led. The other sort of gateway is to Bankgirot, that provides us with the real-time rails required to do what it is we do. And then last but not least, probably the most important one, is the connection to the participating banks into the scheme. So what the Swedish bank community's role here is to basically be facing the market. So banks do the customer acquisition, they do the support, and they hold the relationships with the market. And we are basically the hub behind that facilitates and orchestrates this whole ecosystem. Today we have 7.4 million users in Sweden. So that's around 92% of all Swedes between the ages of 18 to 65. So 7.4 million users, but 6.8 million of those are monthly active, meaning that they did at least one transaction in April 2020. Those users are exceptionally satisfied as well. So 76% of them are promoters. They do on average 7 transactions per month per user. And on average this year, we do 1.8 million transactions every day. We come from a P2P background, but already today, 40% of our transactions are C2B enabled. So it's a merchant payment. And we are trending towards the magical boundary of more than 50% of our transactions being C2B enabled, hopefully in end of Q3. We are the most recommended brand in Sweden. We've won that award 2 years in a row, and we have also built the 3rd highest brand equity of all Swedish brands after Volvo and IKEA. As I mentioned, as I will talk a little bit more about later, is one of our core strategic focus areas is to grow the C2B side. So penetrating more merchants and growing our transaction base with those merchants. Last year, we grew the merchant base with 80%, and today we have 200,000 merchants in Sweden accepting Swish payments. I'll take you through a little bit about our history. So basically, how have we built the service and what has happened along the lines here. So what you see here is basically our monthly transactions mapped out, and going back basically 8 years to when we were founded in 2012. We were founded through a collaboration between the 6 largest banks in Sweden. So at this point, these are the largest banks, came together and realized that there are external threats that we need to face as a collective. And the best way of doing this is to launch a common service and take it to market. Around 1 year later, we had 1 million users. And shortly after that, we realized that there was a pull from the market to adopt a merchant version of the service. What we could see here was that merchants were starting to accept payments to their private Swish accounts. And this is where we launched a service specifically designed for micro merchants. So these are the absolutely smallest merchants that are too small to have a terminal and are unwilling to accept cash. So basically with Swish, you send on the P2P side, you send money to a phone number or an alias, but with the micro merchant service, you send money to a merchant number. This merchant number could be either embedded into a QR code, or it could be printed in plain text at the merchant checkout. End of 2015, we had done 100 million transactions in total. And around the turn of the year 16-17 was kind of key for us. So at this point, we had 50% of the Swedish population using the service. We also started operating Swish under Get Swish AB, a separate legal entity. Before this, Swish had been operated as a co-governed sort of project with the banks. But this was when we put it into a legal entity and started scaling up and staffing up the business. We also launched Swish for e-commerce. So this is basically moving beyond the micro merchant service and coming into one e-commerce, but then also applying this service in physical stores in a more sophisticated sort of way that comes into the way larger retailers and e-commerce players expect to consume payments. Later in 2017, we also launched QR codes. We work with QR codes, NFC, and Bluetooth, but to date, at least, QR codes has been the more successful of the 3. In 2018, we struck our first average of 1 million transactions per month in March. And early last year, we had done 1 billion transactions since inception. And as I said before, last year we did 500 million transactions in 2019 alone. So we're still growing really, really fast. In October last year, we hit a record of 2.8 million transactions in one day. And in the first half of this year, we have launched we have had 3 mega launches. So we have launched a merchant app So this is an app that can be installed on the merchant's phone, where she can accept payments from users, track history, do refunds, and so on. We also launched payouts. So this is a product we truly believe in. This is another way of paying salaries in a more sort of in a marketplace environment where this behavior is changing as well. This is a way for insurance companies to be able to pay out to their customers in real time. And this is a way also for users to be able to transfer funds to and from other companies. And then we also launched Request to Pay in a P2P setting. Request to Pay has been a core function for us in the e-commerce setting and in the physical setting, but this is where we put it in the P2P side as well. So coming back to basically the user penetration, what you have here is in gray, you have the Swedish population split in age brackets. And sorry, in gray, and then in green, you have the Swish users split according to the same age brackets. So between the ages of 18 and 65, we have a 92% coverage. And in the younger population, so between 19 and 35, we have a 97% coverage. So basically, as a merchant and as a user, you can expect your peer to have, or your customer to have Swish. It goes to say as well that my daughter, for example, she's 1 year old and she also has Swish. So Swish is normally the app, but Swish can also be basically the proxy between the IBAN and the phone number. So for her baptism, for example, instead of putting an IBAN in the Facebook invite, we simply just put a phone number, and people could send gifts through Swish that would land on her account. So that is possible as well. So talking a little bit about the product range that we have, and I think this is obviously a very broad question. I personally would love to spend 1 hour on this topic alone, but I'll try to condense this into something more tangible. So we can split this in three, basically. We have Swish for private. So this is the app that the user uses. We have Swish for physical stores, and we have Swish for e-commerce. So Swish for private, this is where the user engages with the app to do a P2P transfer. This can be done in two ways. You can either enter the phone number of the recipient or go to your address book and pull the number from your native contact list, or you can scan the QR code of your peer if he is within proximity. Swish for physical stores can also be split into two sort of sets of products. One set of product is the service that we offer micro merchants. And this has been an extremely successful product for us in Sweden, where most of these merchants do not accept cash anymore. And these small terminals are basically dead with them. They just accept Swish, and that works really well for them. This is a big part of our transaction base is still from these micro merchants. The other version of the service offering to physical stores is where we come into either the terminal or the POS environment. So either through NFC, Bluetooth, or QR codes. And where we basically require a more sophisticated technical integration to the payment systems of the merchants. What happens here is normally we do this through a QR code. And we can elaborate more on that on the Q&A session. And relating to the previous speaker on Corona, this is actually something that we see growing extremely fast right now, because in the nature of our service, it is truly contactless. So you never have to touch the PIN pad of the terminal. You are authenticating yourself on your phone. So that's sort of one case where Corona has really helped us come in to the really, really large retailers here in Sweden. Swish for e-commerce also split in two. So either shopping in a browser, so you can shop on your laptop but pay with your phone. But the most interesting and the strongest use case we have is where you are shopping on your phone and paying on your phone. And this is where we can utilize the underlying sort of app-to-app technology to do an app switch and create an extremely seamless and smooth experience for both the merchant and the user. We often get into the discussion on QR codes, so QR codes versus NFC and so on, and this is where I think it's worth mentioning where the merchant is going with his acceptance points as well. So we see merchants, even the large retailers, at least in Sweden, moving to a setting where the POS is mobile itself. And this is where with mobile payments, you can do a mobile to mobile transaction. This is one case we did with IKEA here in Sweden. So what they have here is basically the sales rep of IKEA has a POS app installed on their phones. This is an Android phone. So I come in as a user to the IKEA store. I ask for help, and the sales rep is following me around the store and selling the goods to me. As I choose which goods I want, the sales rep with her phone scans the barcodes of the products. And as I'm done with my shopping, she creates a checkout on her phone and asks me, how do you want to pay? And in this IKEA case, I had two options, invoice or Swish. If I choose Swish, the sales rep generates a QR code on her phone, which I can scan with my Swish app, conduct the payment, and then just leave the store basically. In this IKEA case, 95% of all their purchases went through Swish. So we see this as sort of a first horizon move for merchants moving more to a mobile environment as well. Can skip this. What are the next steps for us? So I'm probably out of time already, but I'll briefly talk about this. So we have three core strategic areas within Swish. One is maintaining, retaining, and developing the P2P side. So this is the bread and butter of our business, and we need to remain relevant and create additional interaction points with the user so that they still enjoy using Swish in 5 years. And this we do through increased functionality and increased sort of user experience. The second one is merchant growth. So this is where we see this twofold. First of all, it's about increasing the merchant base and coming into the really, really large physical retailers, but also building new products and services that helps the merchants in their business and help them incrementally grow their business. And then third, but not least, where I have personally spent a lot of time the past year since I started, is international expansion. So this goes twofolded. One is expansions, so growing Swish into other geographies with the local bank collectives. And also, it's extremely important for a domestic successful service to have global reach. So this is where we founded the European Mobile Payment System Association last year in August, where Swish with 6 other of the largest mobile wallets in Europe came together, created this association to basically foster mobile payments in Europe and create a state of interoperability where a Swede with Swish can pay at Vipps, Mobile Pay, Twint, MBWay store basically. So this is our overall thinking here, is that we don't see a new PayPal or a new Alipay in Europe. We see these local winners coming together in an interoperable state and enabling their users and merchants to accept payments from other wallets. So this is all I wanted to talk to you about. Or I wanted to talk to you about a lot of things, but this was all we had time for today. So thank you so much, and happy to accept questions.
Joseph, thank you so much for that presentation. You managed to squeeze a lot into a very brief window, so well done, very thorough. Let's dive straight in with the questions. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll take the first one here. How will Swish be affected by P27?
Yeah, that's a question we get all the time, obviously, and something we relate to. We talk quite a lot to P27, but P27 is the underlying rails, right? So we have a change in Sweden where we are moving from this local clearinghouse having built rails specifically for Swish to a TIPS environment, and then P27 comes on top of that. So basically what P27 would be for us is an enabler to continue doing what we're doing, but with Nordic standards. So also being a facilitator for Nordic interoperability on the settlement side, at least.
Okay, another question here. Who pays the fees, users or merchants?
Users don't pay fees, not as of today at least. The bank can choose to charge their users for Swish, but none of them do. The business model from the bank side, and keep in mind that the banks are the acquirers, so they are the ones facing the market. The business model for banks is basically selling transactions to merchants and having a merchant fee on that.
Okay, another one here. This has been given anonymously, sent in anonymously. Did you build your own API or did you use third parties?
We used third parties to build the API, but the API is ours.
Okay.
So we have a number of APIs. It's not one API. It's
right. Then please do continue. Yeah. Okay, then. And we had another question here as well. Are you looking to enter other markets beyond Sweden? I mean, you've got a very efficient system here, so the world must look like a very tempting place at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. So we are in a number of discussions around this today, and it is something that we are looking quite heavily into, and in dialogues already with a number of parties.
Obviously, I don't expect you to name the names of those parties that you're currently talking to, but can you give us an idea about the countries where they may be based? I'm reluctant to go into the exact countries, but I think the core strength of the service is being this hub where you build basically a strictly bank-friendly, bank-led model. This is where we come in, basically, where the bank collective wants to launch a Swish equivalent, basically, and where the bank collective sees a strength of collecting of the collective coming together, basically, as opposed to every bank launching their own service, coming together and having a common rule book, common technology, common onboarding flow, common interface, and common brand, and so on. And this is what I think is the main reason for why we have been successful here in Sweden, at least. Of course. And what sort of a timeline would you be looking at for that rollout beyond Sweden?
Currently, it's done on a case-by-case basis. So, we will see. I can't comment further on the exact.
No, that's fair enough. But I mean, just going back to your presentation, and this is strictly from my perspective. I mean, the age coverage that you illustrated in one of your graphs, I mean, that was very, very impressive, because you seem to have actually also, you seem to have covered a lot of ground in terms of bridging the generational issue here, the generational divide, because there is always going to be that argument about one group of users where the take-up of this kind of technology is perhaps faster than another.
Yeah, I mean, the younger population have started early, but keep in mind, we started 8 years ago, so that people that were 20, 22 at that point are now 30. But then also we see this diversifying quite heavily now during Corona, actually. So the onboarding of people over the age of 65 has increased by 50% since Corona. So this is where basically elder people that have been reluctant to change behavior are now to some extent accepting it much more than before, because they simply don't want to use cash. So,
well, Joseph, keep on doing what you're doing, because clearly it is working. But look, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you as well for taking the time out of a very busy schedule to be with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.